Hey, Pretty Girl Club, welcome back to the Pretty Privilege series. I just woke up this morning and wanted to record this video because I just had to get this off my chest, and I don't see a lot of other people talking about this. The church hates pretty women, okay? So nothing I say on this channel is talking about all people, so don't come in my comment section saying, oh, not all. Okay, generally speaking, a lot of churches, they hate pretty women because, first of all, most women go to churches so they can get husbands. When are we going to admit that? The church supports pick me culture. Churches are filled with extremely male centered women. And a lot of women who spent their lives being femcels, or, once they get into their mid to late 20s, once they get into their mid 30s, they start getting a little desperate. That's when you see a lot of women who suddenly want to go back to the church. And I see a lot of this happening with Black women. And for those of you who are new to this channel, this is a Blackness centered channel. So that's why we're discussing Blackness specifically. But I do see that in the community where there are a lot of Black women who they start getting desperate. They feel like they hit the wall, or they feel like they're about to hit the wall because they've been watching a lot of red pill bullshit. And so then they go into these churches hoping to find their knight in shining armor. They're hoping to find their husbands. A lot of women who are unattractive flock to churches because they feel like the church is the one place where you can come as you are. Like, that's what they tell people. They say, oh, well, charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. That's in Proverbs 31. They overemphasize Proverbs 31. And they talk about how being beautiful, that shouldn't really be a priority. Your priority as a Christian should be like focusing on God or whatever. So you got a lot of women who have let themselves go physically. You have a lot of overweight women, a lot of women with traction alopecia and no edges. They look bad, their lips are crusty. You've got these types of women flocking into the church because they've been rejected by society. Let's be honest, churches are filled with people who have been rejected by society. Think about it. They've been rejected. They've suffered from colorism, texturism, featureism, racism, capitalism. They've been discriminated against out in the world. And so they're trying to go to this godly place. They want to go to God's kingdom or whatever. They want to be around people that are supposed to be more kind and accepting. And the church is the one place where a lot of pick-me's actually feel relevant. And I've talked about this before. For some women, they have this mindset of, if I can't be beautiful, at least I can be useful. So we have these women flocking to these churches, and a lot of women, they will try to get in a leadership position in the church because that's the one place that she finally has power. Think about it. She has no wealth. She has no beauty. She has no friends. She has no family. So the church is the one place where she finally feels relevant. That's the one place where people are finally listening to her. That's the place where she has power. And so that's why you see a lot of these pick-me women, or kind of these homely looking women. They flock to churches. They want to be the gatekeepers of the churches. So there's always an overweight, obese woman who wants to be the lead singer in the choir. There's always, the choir and like the worship team or whatever. For the most part, a lot of the obese, big Black women, they will flock to the choir. Because think about it, a lot of them, they can sit around and sing all day. They can, because they're not working out. They don't work out. They're just ordering food on DoorDash and singing gospel music all day. So they're singing their gospel music, and then they all flock to the gospel choir. And then they want to be the gatekeepers of the choir. And then a lot of those types of women, they don't want to see a pretty woman on the stage. So if you're a pretty woman in the church, the last place that people want to see you is on the stage in any way. A lot of women in churches, they're very threatened when you're pretty and also when you're visible. And so, maybe you do have a talent. Maybe there's some new pretty girl in the church. Maybe she can sing or she can play the piano or whatever. You'll have these women who are gatekeepers. And then they'll be like, oh no, you're not ready to play the piano on the stage yet. You need to sit down, and you just need to sit under the word of God is what they call it. You need to be sat down. You just need to learn more about how to become a better woman of God before you can be on a stage. So I was just thinking about how in a lot of churches, they hate to see pretty women being visible, and especially if you're pretty and single, you are the number one threat. You are public enemy number one in the church. Because think about it. If you look at the Bible and if you look at a lot of the teachings from the Bible, what do they talk about? Whenever they reference pretty single women in the Bible, generally speaking, it's from a negative perspective. Generally speaking, it's either the story in the Bible is either the pretty single woman, she gets married, but then if she does not get married, she's viewed as a seductress. So a lot of people, they have a tendency to stereotype pretty women as being these Jezebels. That's like pretty much the number one stereotype you're going to get. If you're a pretty exotical, you're in the church, and if your church has a lot of pick-me's, the number one thing they're going to do is stereotype you as a Jezebel. They're going to stereotype you as being a seductress, because the church, they tend to teach that beautiful women are kind of like a sexual temptation for men. And then they'll even try to control how you dress. And then they'll say, oh, you can't dress that way because you're going to cause your brothers to stumble. And it's like, wait a minute. So because this girl is wearing shorts, it's 95 degrees outside. And this woman is wearing shorts because she doesn't want to get heat exhaustion. But you're saying that she can't show any of her legs at all because she's going to cause Brother Tyrone to stumble. And I was just thinking about this because I just feel like church culture does not promote a healthy relationship with your beauty. I feel like a lot of beautiful women who come from a churchy background, they tend to struggle with their beauty. They tend to not meet their internalized beauty standard. Maybe they're afraid to meet their internal beauty standard, or if they are beautiful, they will literally be afraid to show their beauty in front of people who are in the church. And by the way, a lot of church people, they tend to conflate beauty and vanity. Like, they tend to stereotype you. If you're pretty, automatically you struggle with vanity. They think that you're automatically vain if you're pretty. And then it's like when you ask them, okay, give me an example of what vanity is. They can never give you an example. When you ask them, okay, prove to me that I'm vain. What exactly did I do that was vain? Because putting on makeup, that is not vanity. Vanity is when you have like an unhealthy obsession with your looks. So it's borderline body dysmorphia. That would be like vanity. But a lot of people, they never bring up vanity until somebody pretty goes in the church. Then suddenly they want to start talking about Jezebel spirits. Suddenly they want to imply that you struggle with vanity. But then they never give examples of what exactly the vanity is. And I've also noticed it's like a lot of church women, they have an obsession with pretty women, but then at the same time, they also want to control those beautiful women as well. So you've got some people in the church where they don't want the pretty woman to be on stage at all. They don't want you to sing on the stage. They don't want you to be a speaker. They don't want you to be a leader of any kind. Then you've got other people where they're desperate to recruit you to their ministries in the church because they want you to make their ministry look more attractive. That's what it is. They want to use your beauty for their personal gain. So it's like, oh, well, why don't you join this ministry? Why don't you join that? And it's like, okay, you're just mad because she didn't want to join the children's church. So because you can't control her beauty, because you can't use her beauty to make your ministry look better, now you're suddenly mad. So there's like this mentally ill, very flip-floppy relationship that the church has with beautiful women. This is why you see a lot of beautiful women in the church where they struggle with confusion. A lot of them struggle with identity confusion. I see a lot of people, they say that mixed people struggle with identity confusion. I also believe that beautiful women in religious backgrounds struggle with identity confusion. Because on the one hand, you were born beautiful, or you know how to enhance your beauty, and then you've got people in the church telling you that that's bad, or they accuse it of being vanity. And it's like, why is it vanity when I wear something fashionable and cute, but suddenly when Big Bertha Beluga wears something fashionable, oh, that's not vanity, that's just normal. That's just fashion. And by the way, if you are an exotical and you're like in a church setting, start to ask the leaders in your church, like, what is vanity? Just ask them, what do you think vanity is? Name examples of vanity that don't have anything to do with social media. Because One of the main examples they'll use of vanity is posting thirst traps on social media. They'll be like, oh, she posts videos of her body. She posted a bikini pic on social media. So basically, that's a spirit of vanity. That's a Jezebel spirit because, she's just trying to attract the male gaze. And it's like, that's projection. You want to attract the male gaze. If you had my body, you would post bikini pics all over social media. And I've also noticed in the church, a lot of their leaders are extremely unqualified. If you were in school, if you were in college, they would not allow you to have a professor that doesn't have a degree or someone that doesn't have experience. But I feel like a lot of churches are filled with people who have no life experience. It's just a random Joe Blow off the street. It's a random person off the street. They have no experience with what they're talking about, but then suddenly you're supposed to believe that this person is more knowledgeable than you when it comes to like the Bible or whatever. So you've got all these preachers talking about vanity, and it's somebody that has no experience with vanity themselves. They have no experience with what it's like to be beautiful. They have no experience with what it's like to have pretty privilege or pretty punishment or to have like body dysmorphia, vanity, whatever. So you got these people literally preaching. They're talking out of their ass basically. They're talking out the side of their neck, trying to act like they have all this knowledge on vanity, but then when you ask that person themselves, like, okay, Pastor so-and-so, what is your experience with vanity? They can't name any examples. So their entire sermon was basically just them stereotyping beautiful women. It's just them negatively stereotyping beautiful women, and they always use Jezebel as an example. And then sometimes they will use modern day pop stars like Tyla or Beyonce as examples of women who are vain. And then when you ask them about these women, like, okay, how is this woman vain? And then they'll say things like, oh, it's because she's dancing seductively. So that's a spirit of vanity. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. So what exact dance moves are considered seductive? Let's talk about that. Because in the church, they're constantly moving the goalpost of like what's considered Jezebel versus what's not. So for example, they will say that any sort of moving of your hips or, if you're moving your hips and butt in a rhythmic way, that apparently that's seductive. And it's like, okay, so let's make the argument that Tyla is being a Jezebel by dancing. What about people who do salsa music, for example? You're kind of moving your hips slightly. So is that less seductive? Because I've also noticed that it's like basically anything black or anything adjacent to black culture, anything that has to do with your ass moving in any capacity, that is considered seductive and like, you're trying to draw the male gaze. And it's like, why is there never any accountability for the men? There's never accountability for the men. So you're accusing dancing of being a spirit of vanity. So basically, as a woman, you can't dance. If you're a pretty woman in the church, you should not be dancing. It just reminds me of like how in the 1800s they used to view it as a sin when you're dancing because, that makes men like aroused or whatever. So I was just thinking about how a lot of women in the church, they have identity confusion because what if you happen to be pretty and what if that's your passion? What if you are passionate about doing salsa dancing or African dancing or like some sort of belly dancing or whatever? What if that's a part of your passions? What if that is the way that you like to work out? So, you know how they have that content where it says trauma is stored in the hips? I guarantee you, majority of women with trauma in their hips, they're probably women with religious backgrounds because they've been taught to hate their own bodies. They've been taught that their hips are a source of sin, basically. Your womb is a source of sin. Your vagina is a source of sin. Your butt is a source of sin. And it's like, you cannot help how you were born. But there are a lot of church people where they have this love-hate relationship with beautiful women. It's like they want the beautiful women to attend their church because, beautiful women tend to make things more popular. When you're the pretty girl, people stereotype you as being popular. Anywhere the pretty girls are, that's where everybody wants to go, right? Think about the most popular vacation spots in the world. Miami, I don't know, Spain, different places in Spain, places in Colombia, the beach. Well, what are those places known for? They're known for having pretty girls. Every single commercial that you see where it shows a lifestyle, like a luxury lifestyle, it always includes a pretty girl. So you've got these churches where they want the pretty women to attend their church. Especially the men in those churches, they want the pretty women to attend. It makes their church look more like popular and cool. But then at the same time, people within the church, they get mad when they cannot control your beauty. They get mad when they can't have your beauty to themselves. They get mad when they can't clout chase off of your beauty. So it's almost like this talking point where it's like, I'm going to treat you like crap while you're here, but then if you leave, I'm also going to get mad. Because as a pretty girl, we already know that when you leave that church, then the church people, they're going to come back and they're going to start love bombing you. They want to try to love bomb you back into the cult. They want to love bomb you back into that church. So it's like, you guys were rude to me. You didn't respect me while I was there. You did not acknowledge my talents while I was there. Because that's another thing. People hate to admit when a beautiful woman is actually talented and smart. Oh no, that's just too threatening, especially in a church setting. Because think about it, a lot of churches, they teach the favor of God. That's one of their talking points, right? Is the concept of the favor of God. So what does that mean? Well, it means God has favorites. That's literally what that phrase means. So if you are gorgeous, well, we already know that gorgeous people are treated better in our society. There's pretty punishment, but there's also pretty privilege as well. So now you've got the unattractive women in the church feeling upset because you have the quote unquote favor of God because, you're just beautiful and gorgeous. So that's another thing too. I've noticed in the church, a lot of the women there struggle with hierarchy thinking. So they have all these hierarchies in their mind, like, and then they want to be a monitoring spirit over you because you're the pretty girl. So she's thinking in her head, like, okay, what's her life like as a woman who's pretty? Well, what kind of dating options does she have? Well, what kind of like lifestyle is she living? How is her life different than mine? Because she's pretty. Like, is she attracting more attention? Does she get access to men who are wealthier? And like I said, the church is a place where pick-me's thrive. It's a place where they literally teach women how to be pick-me's. And if you don't believe me, just go and watch a sermon. First of all, the average female teacher in a church is a married woman. So that's already enough. If that's not promoting pick-me culture, I don't know what is. Because that in and of itself is sending a subliminal message that you are only valid as a female teacher if you are a married woman. I rarely, if ever, see any beautiful single female preachers. I don't think I've ever actually seen that. I can't think of any examples. I can't think of not one example of a beautiful single female preacher, but I can think of examples of men who are single and they're preachers. So the threshold for leadership and kind of like who gets to be a leader or who gets to be in charge, it definitely favors men. There's a much lower barrier to entry for men to have leadership positions in the church versus women because, a lot of religions a lot of them do teach misogyny, obviously. They teach this concept of submission. So, if you're a woman that's beautiful, a lot of people view your beauty as a threat because you're not submitting your beauty to a man. So that's very threatening. You should be submitting your beauty to a husband. You need to have a husband. And that's another thing too. Have you ever noticed when you're pretty, they try to rush you. They want to hurry up and push you into a marriage. So they'll try to recruit the dustiest man in the church. They will recruit the most unattractive man in the church, somebody that they know damn well that you would never talk to outside of that building. They want to try to recruit you to hurry up and get married off to some random dusty in the church because, being a woman who's beautiful, but also being a woman who's not submitting to a man in a marriage, that's extremely threatening because you have too much power. You get to control your own beauty. You're not submitting your beauty to a man. Because remember, in the church, they also teach you that your body is not your own when you're married. Your body is the property of the guy. Whoever you're married to, your body is his. If you don't believe me, please go and watch pretty much any marriage sermons. And don't try to just watch the ones from 2026. Go back and look at their sermons from the last 20 to 30 years. Because I've also noticed that a lot of religions, they try to move the goalpost and change their talking points to keep up with the times. because they want to lure more people in. They want as many people as possible to come to their churches and stuff, because that's how they make money and stuff. People's livelihoods are depending on the church. And for some people, their ego is dependent on how much power they have within the church system. So when you come into the church and you're a beautiful woman, people don't really know how to interact with you, because beauty is a form of social power. I've never heard anybody in the church admit that. I have never in my life heard any religious person admit that beauty is a form of social power. They're not going to admit that, because the only power they believe in is like Jesus, of course. So any other power structure in the world, they're going to say it's like demonic. So, according to church talking points, money, they'll say talking points like, oh, money is the root of all evil, or they'll say that, believing that your beauty is a source of power, they're going to say that that is vanity. They're going to say that that is a Jezebel spirit. So it's almost like they promote women feeling guilty over their own beauty as well. So you might just be a normal, innocent, beautiful woman. You're not trying to seduce anyone. You're not trying to take anybody's man. You're just minding your business. But then you got people teaching these talking points where they literally want you to feel a sense of guilt for your beauty. So I feel like a lot of pretty women who came from a church background, I actually think a lot of those women struggle with self-hatred for their own beauty. Or like being scared of their own beauty. By the way, if you're new to this channel, be sure to check out my older video called The Fear of Being Seen or Being Scared of Your Beauty. You can just type it into the YouTube search. Just type in Exoticals United, Being Scared of Your Beauty, and then it should pop up. But I think a lot of churches, they do not equip beautiful women to navigate this world. That's one of the worst places you can go. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to say at the beginning, if you are religious, please do not watch this video. If you're a church person, don't watch this video. I will actually block you in my comment section if you try to defend your church or whatever. That's not what this video is for. This video is for women who can relate to it. This video is to help pretty women deconstruct their religious insecurities, because I really feel like a lot of churches, they program pretty women to be insecure with their beauty. That's really what that is. Any sort of confusion around your beauty, any sort of anxiety around your beauty, any sort of fear of your own beauty or fear of being seen, that is actually called insecurity. That's what that is. But a lot of people in the church culture, they don't want you to be confident. They don't want you to have confidence outside of Christ. That's what they say. They say that, Jesus is the source of your strength and confidence or whatever. So if you have any other sources of self-esteem, such as your beauty, that is, oh my gosh, that's a big no-no. That is very taboo in the church. You're not supposed to like flaunt your beauty or enhance your beauty or keep up with all the latest like makeup trends and fashion trends and stuff. That is generally viewed as a waste of time. In the church, they teach you that you're supposed to be, quote unquote, building God's kingdom, but then they never tell you how to build God's kingdom. They just give you these vague scriptures like, oh, just love your neighbor as yourself. They always, like the Bible is always the answer. A scripture is always the answer. So they'll say, oh, you shouldn't be focused on beauty. You should only focus on like building God's kingdom. But then they don't tell you specifically what to actually do in your everyday life. So it's kind of like, it's not very practical. It's not very practical. And a lot of their teachings, they do not equip women for the dating market and stuff. They definitely don't tell women to decenter men. Oh my goodness. They worship a man. They worship God, who they refer to God as him. And obviously they refer to Jesus as him. And, in some cases, they even believe Jesus is white, or, they have a certain race that they put on Jesus, whether they think Jesus is white or he's black and has dreads or whatever. So you've literally got these religions where they worship a man. They worship a masculine entity or a masculine spirit. They refer to the spirit as him. They always refer, and then they'll say in the church, they'll be like, oh, God, the Holy Spirit is not masculine or feminine. And it's like, okay, so then why do you always refer to the Holy Spirit as him? Why is it, if it doesn't have a gender, why do you not refer to the Spirit as they, them, or her? Or, why is it always him? Him is the default. So that's a whole other episode that I could do, actually. Um, but I feel like a lot of churches, they hate pretty women. I feel like a lot of femcels actually run the church. Think about it. Femcels run the church. Unattractive women rule the church. If you don't believe me, just think about your local church. When you walked into church when you were growing up, did you see a whole bunch of baddies when you walked in there? Is that how you grew up? So, did you have a female pastor? Did you have female single pastors that were baddies? Or was your church mostly unattractive women? Unattractive women are the dominant types of women in the churches. Like most of the female leaders are unattractive because that's less threatening anyway. But most of the female leaders are unattractive, or if they are attractive, they will get married to a dusty, which is going to make them stressed out and it's going to make them lose their beauty. That's another thing that I've noticed in the church. I have had so many friends. The reason I'm thinking about this is because I have had friends before in real life where I've had to distance myself because I will see them go from being this beautiful, confident woman to suddenly she stops wearing makeup. She only wears her natural 4C hair in a bun or whatever with no products in it. She's letting her acne get worse or whatever because, all of the skincare and all that, that's more so vanity. So like spending a lot of money on dermatologists and stuff, they view that as a form of vanity. So I've seen in my real life, I have witnessed the church culture just destroying these women's self-esteem and just destroying their beauty and literally discouraging these women from being beautiful because they'll tell these pretty girls like, "Oh no, looks don't matter. Your acne doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. Oh, you don't need to get your teeth fixed. Why are you trying to spend money on fixing your teeth? Oh no, don't go get your hair done or don't try to do these intricate styles with your type 4 hair. Don't try to do anything. Just wear your hair in the same homely type of hairstyle. Only wear clothes that look a little bit more homely. Don't wear anything that shows off your shape because again, that's vanity." They view any positive female attention as vanity. If you're getting positive attention from men or if men are appreciating your beauty, if anybody in society is appreciating your beauty, that is vanity. You are tapping into a Jezebel spirit, is what a lot of them will say. And so I feel like a lot of churches, they're filled with these women who are femcels, or they're filled with women who wasted their lives. They're filled with women who wasted their lives being married to these bums. Because that's another thing too. The church is very accepting to dusty men. The church loves dusty bums and because that's who they reach out to, right? That's why it's called outreach. Who are they doing the outreach towards? They're not doing outreach to billionaires. They don't go and evangelize in the richest parts of town. No, they go and evangelize at the homeless shelters. They go and evangelize to the alcoholics and the addicts and stuff like that. And then they bring those men in the church and kind of clean them up just a little bit. They clean those men up just enough for you to not really realize what you're dealing with. And then they try to marry those men off to all these gorgeous women who come into the church. So it's almost like red pill adjacent. That's what I would call it. As a matter of fact, the red pill space on YouTube uses a lot of Christian talking points. They use a lot of Christian talking points about submission and about how you should be fruitful and multiply, so they don't like women who don't have kids or whatever. They talk about how they don't care about your education. They prioritize domestic skills over education. So all of those, these red pill talking points, where do you think they got those talking points from? The red pill didn't just come up with that out of nowhere. No, a lot of those red pill types of guys actually are men with religious backgrounds. These are men who were Muslims like Myron. These are men who grew up in Christian churches or whatever. They were Jehovah's Witnesses. They were Mormon guys. So there's a lot of overlap with red pill culture and church culture. And that's something that a lot of people won't admit. So you've got these women who have wasted their beauty. They've wasted their life away by marrying the local church dusties. And then you've got these older women who try to tell younger women what to do, right? Because that's what they teach in the church. You're supposed to respect your elders. They put old people on a pedestal in churches. Young people are dismissed in churches and old people are put on a pedestal. And they use that scripture where it says you have to respect your elders, right? They say that the young women, or they say the older women should be teaching the younger women. That's a scripture in the Bible. So they almost force you to learn from these older, dusty women with these outdated talking points, the outdated lifestyles. If you don't believe me and you're in the church, go and ask women in your church. Go and look at and examine the women in your church who are 50 years old or older. Examine the 50 and older married women in your church. If you were to meet a man just like her husband today, would you date that man? Because a lot of these women who are giving the young women advice, these women are married to dusties. These women's husbands are unattractive, fat, out of shape, cheaters, porn addicts. By the way, porn addiction is huge in the church. Porn addiction is very big in the church. I think that it's actually bigger in religious circles versus non-religious, just because, they also teach sexual repression. They don't realize that that's what they're doing. Because, okay, so there's a connection between your beauty, your femininity, and sexiness. There's an underlying connection there. But in the church, they teach you to kind of suppress your beauty, suppress your desires, obviously. You definitely don't want to make yourself desirable. And it's not okay if you are desiring a man in the church or if he's desiring you. They say it's a spirit of lust. But then at the same time, they expect you to go out and be an expert in the dating and marriage market and they pressure women to get married and stuff. It's extremely male centered. It's just a hot mess. It's a hot mess. So that's why I say that a lot of churches hate pretty women and they set pretty women up for identity confusion. They set pretty women up for failure. And so this is why a lot of pretty women, they will go to these churches, and then the longer these women stay in the church, the more depressed they become. And like I said, I'm talking about this because I've literally witnessed it with some of my friends, and they won't admit it. And I can't tell them that the source of their depression is coming from basically suppressing their beauty, suppressing their personality, fear of being seen, and all of this is being encouraged by the church that they're a part of. Because they've got all these dusty, overweight women telling the pretty girl, oh, you don't need to lose any weight. Well, why do you want to have a six-pack? Why do you need a six-pack? You're not going to be showing your stomach anyway. I've literally heard talking points like this. I've heard talking points from women they'll be like, oh, well, why are you wearing thong underwear? You shouldn't be wearing pants that are tight enough to show your underwear line anyway. And it's like, okay, so she can't wear form-fitting clothing. She doesn't need to have a six-pack because that's vanity or whatever. She doesn't need to lose weight because that's vanity. She shouldn't be wearing certain types of underwear because that's vanity. So you can't wear push-up bras, obviously, that's vanity. You can't wear thongs because that's vanity. In some churches, they're even more traditional, where it's like you shouldn't even be wearing makeup and stuff because, it's flexing. They view beauty as a flex, and they think that the way you were born is a genetic flex. The way that you were born is a genetic advantage over them. And so they feel like you're just naturally flexing. They accuse you of flexing and stunting when you're not really trying to do that. That's literally just how you exist in this world. And then a lot of them downplay when a woman actually has a gift in the area of beauty, because there are some pretty women where maybe that's her gift. Maybe she actually is good at doing makeup artistry. Maybe she's good at doing nails and fashion styling and color theory and all that. Maybe she's really good at aesthetics, but they don't view that as being a real gift. In the church, they have hierarchy thinking regarding gifts as well. So, obviously the top most pedestalized gifts in the church are going to be the spiritual gifts if they believe in that. So the healing, preaching, whatever, prophecy and all that. If they don't believe in that, the gifts that are the most pedestalized are anything on the stage. So singing, preaching, maybe even teaching in the children's ministry or being the leader of the youth or whatever. So they pedestalize and prioritize those gifts, but then they don't really tell people or help people to use other gifts and talents to succeed in society. And by the way, a lot of their social climbing strategies in the church, they only teach you how to succeed within church culture. They don't really teach you how to succeed outside of the church. So I feel like a lot of their advice, oh, love your neighbor as yourself, or show the fruits of the spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience. They tell you to do that, and it's well, yeah, that works better if you are dealing with people who are genuine. in the church, yeah, if somebody's a genuine church person and they are a kind person, of course that's going to work. Being kind and nice because they're being kind to you. But the real world outside of the church is not like that. So no, telling me to be patient with somebody who is clearly a scammer, or, telling me to be patient with this dusty man using the fruits of the spirit as a weapon to keep pretty women in abusive marriages, that is not helpful to pretty women. So this is why I say it's almost as if the church literally hates pretty women, because they also don't realize that when you're pretty, there's a target on your back. You've got women who are monitoring spirits. Don't even get me started on women who are catty in church and religious backgrounds. So as soon as you walk through those doors, people are gossiping. They're like, oh, who's she? Oh, well, how old is she? Well, is she dating anybody? Well, who is she dating? And then you've got all these women in the church who are fawning over the men in the church, because remember, churches are mostly women. Churches are what? Is it 70% women? They're majority women. If you don't believe me, go to your local church. Go to your local church, and I want you to count in the audience how many women you see versus how many men. I guarantee you're going to see way more women in the church than men. So what lures a lot of women into the church is this promise that God is going to bring you a spouse. So that's why I feel like the church is a breeding ground for pick-me's. I feel like the church is extremely attractive to pick-me women, because they always promise you that if you just focus on God, seek first the kingdom of God, and all those things shall be added unto you, right? Matthew 6:33, you're going to get that husband. You're going to get this magical, ethereal, knight in shining armor, man of God. So you got all these women who are touch-starved, they're validation-starved, they're desperate for marriage, they feel like they've, quote-unquote, hit the wall. Because remember, the church actually supports that talking point. They don't say it like that. They don't call it hitting the wall, but they do say beauty is fleeting, and, they kind of, they make it sound like all the beauty you have is just going to be completely gone. And we know that that's actually false. We know that that's false. You can look just as beautiful when you're older. Like, there are some people who age well, but in the church, they teach that there's kind of this scarcity mindset in regards to beauty. Oh, beauty is fleeting. You're not going to have that beauty anyway. So you might as well not do anything with it. So, you need to cover up. Do not wear makeup. Don't grow your hair out. Definitely don't grow your hair to tailbone length. Because why are you trying to grow it to tailbone length? Why do you want your hair to be down to your hips? For what? So men can look at your hair hanging down by your hips? Why do you want your hair to be mid-back length? So men can be staring down your back? There actually are people who think like this in the church. And I see a lot of people, they'll be like, oh, well, no, Exoticals United, you're using extreme examples. That's being legalistic. And it's like, well, no, a lot of people in religious circles are extreme. A lot of religions and spiritualities are inherently extreme. That's literally what draws you to that. That's why they call it being radical, right? They actually promote that. Being radical for Christ, being quote unquote on fire, being passionate, being as passionate as possible. So to be passionate and to be radical and to be on fire, that in and of itself, that is being extreme. So telling me that I'm using extreme examples when religions literally promote being as extreme as possible, I mean, they literally promote that that's good. Going out and trying to convince as many people as possible to join your religious group, that is extreme. So it's like, why is it that when I create a YouTube video, my YouTube videos are extreme, but all these religions, all these talking points that they have, those are not extreme? So do you see what I mean about the gaslighting? People are constantly moving the goalpost. And I've also heard some churches teach this talking point that beauty is a gift. And they'll say, this woman has the gift of beauty and influence. Okay, but they don't realize that they're accidentally creating a hierarchy by saying that, some women have been gifted with beauty while others have not. Okay, so you're perpetuating jealousy. You're actually going to make the jealousy even worse, because then all the ugly women in the church are going to be like, oh crap, I don't have that gift. I don't have the gift of beauty. And also, don't even get me started on people who believe that all beauty is tied to Eurocentric beauty standards. So now you're going to have the unambiguous dark-skinned black women really mad because, now they're going to a church that's saying, oh, some women have the quote-unquote gift of beauty, but then beauty is adjacent to whiteness. So it's literally the opposite of their phenotype. And there are just so many holes in the talking points of these different churches. And so this is why I feel like for a lot of pretty women, for a lot of pretty exoticals, I really do feel like some churches are actually the worst place that you can go. I feel like, okay, when it comes to church, I think that some churches are good at helping you develop skills and talents. Like if you're good at singing, if you want to practice singing on a stage, if you want to practice talking on a stage or whatever, if you want to practice, I don't know, cooking for a large group of people, I think that the churches can help some people develop their gifts and skills. But I don't feel like you need to do it in a church setting in order to develop yourself. Also, some body types are demonized in the church, and I'm speaking from personal experience. I'm tall and thin and an hourglass. So, if you have that flat stomach with those wide hips and a perky bubble butt and you have breasts or whatever, that body type is demonized. Any body type that's attractive, really, is going to be demonized in the church setting. The only body types that are not demonized in the church are obese women. Those are the only body types in the church where it's just like, okay, you're good. Nobody really cares. You don't really get a lot of people saying that you're tempting other people. But as soon as you walk into the church, if you're fit, if you're in shape, if you're beautiful, then suddenly people start examining your outfits. They start memorizing your outfits. So they memorize how many times you wore shorts this summer. They will memorize if you're wearing a push-up bra versus when you're not wearing a bra. It's like, why are you tracking the height of my boobs? Like, think about that for a second. There are women in the church who will literally track how perky your boobs are. They're tracking whether or not you're wearing a push-up bra. And they're memorizing when you wear a push-up bra, and then they're going to talk to you about it. Or they will try to hand you a scarf or something like, oh, you need to cover your legs because like your skirt is too short, or like, and it's like, okay, but if people were truly like worshiping God or whatever, they wouldn't even be paying attention to this girl's skirt. So I just feel like the church culture, it creates a lot of anxiety for pretty women. I feel like it encourages pretty women to be anxious. You have to be anxious about, oh my God, am I showing too much? Am I doing too much? That's the biggest source of anxiety for pretty women in the church. It's, am I doing too much? Do I look too good? Am I too tempting or whatever? And then there are also a lot of churches that they create a beauty hierarchy. Generally speaking, religions pedestalize natural beauty the most, even though their standard for natural beauty is subjective, because technically you were not born with perfect skin. You weren't born with perfect teeth or long, healthy hair. You had to use some sort of enhancements to help you to achieve that look, but whatever. A lot of churches, they put natural beauty on a hierarchy and then they demonize beauty enhancements. So they demonize you wearing makeup. They demonize if you're wearing clip-ins or if you highlight your hair. They view that as a form of self-hatred. So I also feel like a lot of the black women in the women in the black community who try to talk crap about exoticals, a lot of those women, they came from church backgrounds where it was demonized to wear any beauty enhancements. Or they say that your weaves are cursed because a lot of women, like the human hair, a lot of the human hair that is sourced from India was done in a ritual. Like they have rituals where they shave their heads and they throw away their hair because they're dedicating themselves to their Hindu god or something like that. So, some churches, they teach that wearing your wigs and weaves, that's actually a curse. Like the actual hair has been dedicated to Satan. I mean, I've heard some crazy talking points. I've heard some absolutely insane talking points. So, they preach that there's a hierarchy and that natural beauty is number one. So any beauty enhancements are automatically looked down upon. They view that as you're being vain. You're trying too hard, basically. That's vanity. You're trying too hard, enhancing your beauty. They have this invisible limit of beauty enhancements that you're supposed to have. Like, okay, maybe you can wear a little bit of makeup, but no weave, though. Or, okay, maybe you can wear braids, but you can't wear long, curly hair. Or, they just have all these weird rules depending on the church you go to. And I don't even think it's on a conscious level. I think for most church people, they're doing it subconsciously because if you ask them, like, hey, where'd you get that talking point from? They can't tell you because it sure didn't come from their Bible. So I feel like they use the Bible. They'll use the Bible as their foundation, and then they will create their own talking points from there. So that's how they're able to successfully gaslight pretty women. That's how they're able to move the goalpost. And then Another social dynamic I've noticed with pretty women in the church is you have the church ladies who will try to exclude you. So it's like they have their own friend group. All the ugly girls click up or whatever. All the basic Betties will click up at the church. All the belugas will click up. All the crusty women click up together. And then they want you to feel excluded. So they want you to feel excluded, but then when you leave the church, they want to try to love bomb you to get you back in. And they'll be like, oh, you're our sister in Christ. Oh no, like, don't get offended. That's another thing they'll tell you in the church. Oh, you can't be easily offended. You got to forgive, right? So you have to forgive. They always promote to the prettiest women in the church. Of course, the prettier you are, the more forgiving you have to be, the more kind and patient. They will hold you to the fire. When you're a gorgeous woman in the church, oh no, you got to be the prettiest, the nicest, the most patient, the most kind. You definitely have to be the most humble. That's another one of their core values in church culture is being humble. So, of course, if you're pretty, you need to be as humble as possible. Otherwise, the people in the church actually will humble you. Trying to exclude you from church activities or excluding you from sisterhood within the church, that's actually a humbling tactic. And a lot of church women don't admit that. They'll say that, oh, they felt like you had a negative spirit. That's another thing. They'll try to accuse you of being demonic or having a demonic spirit. They'll accuse you of having a spirit of conceit, or they'll say you have a spirit of arrogance or whatever. And then when you ask them to give an example, like, okay, how was I arrogant? Like, what exactly did I do? They'll never tell you what you did. They always tell you what they felt. They'll be like, oh, I just felt it in my spirit that you were just a Jezebel, or I just felt it in my spirit that something wasn't right with you. I had this inkling in my spirit, or like they love using the word spirit to like mask their jealousy. They will literally use the Holy Spirit as a way to mask their jealousy or prejudice against pretty women. They'll use the Spirit or God or Jesus to mask their judgment of a pretty privileged woman. So they're masking their internalized misogyny with their religious talking points. So this is why I feel like for a lot of pretty women who are anxious or they have a fear of being seen, I would say that it's probably coming from some sort of religious background. And I know a lot of people will be offended by this video, but I really don't care because I'm going to say what I want to say. And a lot of women in the church, they don't like when a pretty woman comes in because all of those church women, they're already fighting over the church men. They're already fighting over the hot guy in the church. Whoever's considered high value in that church. By the way, churches have different standards for what's high value versus the real world. Like in church, if a guy's a pastor or an up-and-coming pastor, obviously he is stereotyped as being high value. That's another thing that never sat well with me. The fact that a guy is in ministry, that automatically makes the guy high value. So because the guy is on stage talking, he's automatically high value. So you've got all these women in the church who are secretly fantasizing about the pastor. They're secretly fantasizing about the guy who plays the guitar on the stage or whatever. So when you're the pretty girl and you just happen to walk in, the women feel threatened by you because they feel like you're more likely to capture that man's attention. Because you are conventionally pretty, like outside of the church. There are different beauty standards within the church versus like in the real world. So in the church, the beauty standard is basically the opposite. It's being, bad built, being homely or whatever, no beauty enhancements, quote unquote natural beauty is what they call it, but in reality it's kind of like being homely. I would say their beauty standard is girl next door at best. Definitely not glamour. Glamour is, oh my gosh, that is very bad. That is not encouraged in the church. Name one church that encourages women to be glamorous. Name one. Name one pastor that encourages women to be as glamorous as possible. Name one church that talks about using pretty privilege to succeed and to get ahead in society. Name one. I'll wait. Glamour is heavily looked down upon in the church because remember, people used to associate glamour with magic. That's literally where they got that phrase, glamour magic. People in churches, they used to associate glamour with deception, like wearing a weave or like having your hair looking big and teased out or, wearing colors that complement your skin complexion. They literally used to view that as a form of deception and a form of magic like back in the day. So glamour is something that is heavily discouraged in the church. I have never in my life been to any sort of religious group where they believe that glamour is positive. I've never seen that. I've never seen it where they think that being as glamorous as possible is a good thing. Never heard of it. Name one religion that promotes that. So if you happen to be glamorous, you're going to be hated in the church because, all those femcels in the church, all these validation starved women. And by the way, the reason I call them femcels is because I do believe a lot of church women are involuntarily celibate. And the reason I say involuntarily, it's not because men don't want them, it's because their church has told them that you are not supposed to like have sex before marriage, you're not supposed to like kiss anybody, touch anybody, etc. So a lot of women, they are lying to themselves. Actually, some of the women may be DL as well. That's another aspect of churches. Like we talk a lot about DL men in churches. Well, what about the DL women? Because that's a thing as well. Like I'm not kidding. I've seen women in the church where they're the most jealous of pretty women, but then in reality, once they leave the church later on, then they come out as like lesbians and then they like become studs or whatever. So that's another aspect of church culture that nobody talks about on YouTube. People on YouTube, they're too scared to offend people. They're too busy pandering for subscribers. They're too busy pandering for views or whatever. So they don't want to say stuff that could be offensive to their own audience. So they'd rather just sweep stuff under the rug so they can try to like be popular and like get money or whatever. But it's like, why does nobody talk about that? Why does nobody talk about how there are DL women in the church? A lot of the men that these women are lusting after, those men aren't even straight. Half the guys on the worship team are gay. Half the guys singing in the choir are gay. And those men are trying to pretend that like, oh no, I'm not gay, I'm just celibate. No, dude, you're gay. We can all see it. Like, it's obvious. So you've got all these people in the church who are basically living a lifestyle of a femcel or living a lifestyle of an incel. Because think about it, incel culture is actually more prevalent in the church. Because think about what most church guys do outside of church. They play video games all day and look at corn. That's what they do. That's what a lot of church men do. If you don't believe me, go to your local church and start asking the guys at your church, hey, what do you do outside of here? He freaking plays video games for several hours and he probably looks at corn. They probably have a corn addict support group at your church. Why do you think they literally have entire support groups and entire sermons about corn? Well, because corn addiction is one of the most prevalent sins in the church. So they have to create an entire support group. They have to create all these apps that will like block the men from looking at corn, because that's how bad the corn addiction is in the church. So there's another like thing that happens too, where if you tell somebody that something is bad, or if you make something forbidden, like corn, for example, it actually can make young people more curious about it because they're like, well, why are they so against this? Like, what is it? It can actually make people even more curious when you demonize something so badly. So that's why a lot of times you see people in the church who have like the worst corn addictions and stuff. A lot of times you see men in the church who are more likely to be PDF files and stuff. That's part of why you hear so much about that. But as far as the church hating pretty women, a lot of church women, they don't like the pretty woman because, there are only 10 hot guys in that entire church. And so then, of course, those hot guys, their head gets blown up. That's another thing. A lot of churches, they will inflate men's egos. So this guy is a complete loser outside of church. He's a complete bum in society. Like in the real world, this guy's dusty. But in the church, because he can sing or whatever, now suddenly he's freaking Michael Jackson. This guy is fucking Chris Brown in the church. In the real world, he is a garbage man. He's a janitor, whatever. He's just an average Joe Blow. But in the church, he's on the stage. He's being pedestalized. His ego is getting bigger and bigger. So a lot of churches, they tend to inflate men's egos and they deflate women's self-esteem, especially in regards to women's physical appearance. And then a lot of men in the church, a lot of the male preachers, they will lie and then they'll say, oh no, dating and relationships, it's not about looks at all. Like that doesn't really matter. It's more so about like who you are and like your spirit and like how emotionally beautiful you are. And so then they're actually perpetuating this stereotype that if you're single, you must be emotionally ugly or something's wrong with you. That's why you hear that talking point. It's because their sermons are telling you that, you got picked. The prize is being picked for marriage. The prize is getting married and having the kids or whatever. So if you didn't get picked for marriage, it's because you were not quote unquote wifey material. Because the Proverbs 31 woman is married, right? Name one single woman in the entire Bible who is heavily promoted in the church. The only woman I can think of is Mary. And why do they promote Mary? Well, because she birthed a man, Jesus. She birthed a male gendered God, Jesus. And I already know if my parents were to see this video, they'd probably be very disappointed. My parents actually are aware of my channel, but it's like, let's be honest, most of the women in the church culture, they're not promoted, especially not the single women. As a matter of fact, you know what? Mary was not single. She was with Joseph. So she just happened to birth Jesus on her own because like God impregnated her, the Spirit of God impregnated her. But actually Mary was not single. She was supposed to get married to Joseph. And by the way, the church also demonizes single mothers. It's so hilarious how the church demonizes single mothers, but the church also creates single mothers because they encourage these pretty young women to get married to these local church dusties. They want to tear away the pretty women. They want to take those pretty women off the dating market or whatever. They want to siphon off all the pretty women and funnel them into churches so that these incel church men can have wives. These men would not be able to last a day outside of those church walls. These men are not able to survive one day. They can't even make it. A lot of times they're uneducated people, and this is no shade if you don't go to college or whatever, but like a lot of the men in the church that they're putting on pedestals, these are just regular men who are average at best. But in the church, they're worshiping these men. They're making it like, oh, he's such a man of God, or like, oh, this is the prophet, or this is the apostle so-and-so, or like, this is Reverend Dr. so-and-so. So they give them all these titles, or they give them these special robes that they wear, or, like they put them on a stage. They're quick to put a man on the stage at a church, but they're very slow to put the women in leadership positions. And some churches don't even believe women can be leaders at all. So they promote male-centeredness. They promote this culture where it's like men are the gatekeepers of everything. So a lot of women, they start having this external locus of control, because they feel like, oh, I have to wait for God to favor me, or I have to wait for God to quote unquote tell me what the next step is. So you got a lot of women who are they're living their life on pause. Also, I feel like it relates to a PTSD response called freeze. So remember with PTSD, there's fawning, there's freezing, there's fight or flight. So I feel like freezing is what a lot of pretty women do in the church. They pause everything. They pause their lives. They pause their beauty routine. They pause their level up strategies. They pause their social climbing because obviously in the church, social climbing is bad. Obviously that's demonic in the church. That's viewed as demonic. That's viewed as worldly, which is worldly. Calling something worldly is like the nice way of saying it's demonic. Because what do they say? They say that the devil is in charge of this world, right? So if you called something worldly, you might as well have called it demonic. Words have meaning. And I feel like a lot of people in the church, they try to tiptoe around their real beliefs. Like, no, you believe social climbing is demonic. You believe that social climbing is arrogance or that's like a Jezebel spirit. And so they socialize these women like, oh, you need to have the fruits of the spirit and whatever. And, being pretty is not important. What's more important is being patient and being submissive to your husband or whatever. And like, just waiting on God for a husband or praying. Instead of leaving him, you need to pray for him. That's another thing that they say in churches. So they encourage women to actually stay in these bad relationships as well. They encourage dusty relationships. They really do. And then they'll pedestalize men who give the bare minimum. So they'll say, oh, he's a good man of God because he's not cheating and he's not beating. If he doesn't cheat you or beat you, then he's a good man. If he's not punching you in the face and he's not with another woman, then he's okay. So basically they're kind of sweeping things under the rug. So it's okay for him to talk to you crazy then. It's okay for him to financially abuse you. It's okay for him to dismiss you or neglect you. It's okay for him to be emotionally neglectful. A lot of churches actually promote relationships that have emotional neglect. They do not talk about emotional neglect and what that looks like. In fact, they will just use the church as kind of a band-aid or a coping mechanism. So you got a lot of these femcel women, they've been emotionally neglected in society. You got a lot of these incel loser types of men who have also been neglected in society, and they all come together to kind of use the church culture as a coping mechanism. So the church is where they finally feel relevant. The church is where they feel seen for a couple of hours. And then they have to create these small groups, which are really like these small support groups. So it's kind of like these small coping mechanism groups. They're kind of like small therapy groups in a way. So they get together and talk about their struggles or whatever. So it's like there's not really anything practical in a lot of cases. There are not practical solutions. It's always, oh, the way you solve your problem is just by coming to church and praying, and then like singing a couple of songs about how you're going to overcome. It literally reminds me of African American slaves. How they would just sing hymns while they were fucking on the fields, like getting beat. They're just singing hymns about how we shall overcome someday. So it's always like an impractical solution to a practical problem. So, like I said, that's just a coping mechanism. I don't think it's a solution. It's just a coping mechanism. So it helps you to deal with how bad your life already is. It doesn't solve any of the actual problems. There are churches right now where it's literally a mega church. The church has access to millions of dollars. They could easily make some of their members rich. And in a lot of cases, usually it's just the pastor that becomes rich, and then the rest of the people in the church are going to be stuck struggling. So it's almost like they also have this MLM, kind of this multi-level marketing setup when it comes to finances as well. So you got the people at the top who are benefiting the most financially from the existence of the church, and then the people who are members in the pews are the most poor. So that's a whole other economic side of churches. So again, you got these men who would have been Dusties had it not been for the church. So he was a regular Dusty guy, but then because he started this church or whatever, and he got people to donate in the offering, now he went from being a broke Dusty to being middle class or whatever. And then you got a lot of pastors and leaders who are living their lives on debt. They're promoting a false image. So you got these people where they're kind of flexing in front of their church members, like, oh, look at my nice car or whatever. And then you got people who are in the audience who look up to these people. But in reality, those people are losers in society. They're living their lives based on debt. They're one paycheck away from their car getting repossessed. But they're convincing you that they have quote unquote favor, or, they just have all these gifts or whatever, or like, they're special or chosen in God's eyes. That's another thing. Like looking back, I feel like that also creates a hierarchy as well. You got God's chosen people. You got the chosen ones like David. Like King David, who's like a man after God's own heart, right? Even though he unalived Bathsheba's husband so that he could fuck Bathsheba. So, but he's a man after God's own heart. But then you got these women like Jezebel. Or what was the other one where she was like a prostitute? Basically, in the Bible, the women, like the worst thing a woman could do is like have sex or something like that, or commit adultery. But then in the Bible, the best men, the most pedestalized men like Paul or David, these are men who did way worse things than just adultery. So that's another thing. I just feel like a lot of religions, they create a lot of hierarchies, they promote hierarchy thinking, and I also feel like, generally speaking, it's going to have a negative effect on pretty women's self-esteem, because they teach you to have a love-hate relationship with your own beauty. But what do you ladies think? Can anyone relate to what I'm talking about? Let me know what you think in the comment section, and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.